Hello, and welcome to the 2021 Standards Technology Forum. My name is Lakshmi Mahan, and I'm the President and CEO of Global Data Vision. It's an honor for us to host this event again, and I want to extend a warm welcome to our guests as we kick off our forum this year. Due to travel difficulties that continue as a result of COVID-19, we have once again opted out for a largely virtual forum. Some of us, however, are coming to you live from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, while some of our European colleagues have convened in Berlin, Germany. We hope that you and your families continue to stay safe wherever you may be. As many of you are aware, and for those who are participating for the first time, the Standards Technology Forum is proudly celebrating its 5th year. We began as a rather small group of 60 people in New York City in 2017, and we have grown this year to include over 200 participants that represent large global SDOs, NSBs, regulatory bodies, government, and industry. This is our largest forum yet. We began this forum to share technology-related best practices with one another candidly. What does technology mean to our organizations? How do we measure its success? What are some initiatives we could collaborate on together? Our community has grown because technology is profoundly important to all of us, and yet it still remains quite elusive. Terms like digital transformation and smart standards are ones we've all heard, but very few of us has a consistent definition for what these terms actually mean. Therefore, here we are again in an effort to continue the important conversations regarding sound, reliable technology solutions as they bring important efficiencies to our day-to-day tasks and into our future strategic goals. Today and tomorrow, you will hear from an array of dynamic speakers, some of whom will provide updates to past forum conversations, and others who will discuss emerging technologies at the forefront of their business strategies. I would be remiss if I did not emphasize the organizations that have worked tirelessly to help us during this year's event. Each of them has played an integral role in bringing you the 2021 agenda, and I would also like to extend a heartfelt thank you to both our corporate sponsors and our event sponsor listed. Your sponsorships allow us to ensure the Technology Forum continues, hopefully next year in person, as we highlight new and emerging technologies for our global community. A few housekeeping items. The agenda is available on the Standards Technology Forum website. These sessions are being recorded, and many participants, all of you in fact, have the ability to ask questions in the Q&A area at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you have anything private that you'd like to share, please use your chat. We will answer as many questions as possible at the end of our sessions, and if you have any issues, please contact me directly. Welcome again, and I'm looking forward to a great event. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce our 2 keynote speakers, both of whom are no strangers to our community. First, Mr. Sergio Mujica, who joined ISO as Secretary General in July 2017, having spent 7 years at the World Customs Organization as Deputy Secretary General. The WCO aims to enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of customs administrations worldwide, and within this role, Mr. Mujica was responsible for the design and implementation of the WCO strategic plan. This included simplification, harmonization, and standardization of customs procedures, in addition to capacity building initiatives aimed at the WCO members. This gave him significant experience in an international setting, building consensus within a large membership-based organizations. Prior to working at the World Customs Organization, Mr. Mujica spent 15 years working for the government of Chile with the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Economic Affairs, and as the Director General of Chile Customs. A Chilean national, he has a law degree from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile and a master's degree in international law from the American University in Washington, D.C. Our next keynote speaker is Mr. Christoph Winterhalter, who is the chairman of the executive board of DIN, the German Institute for Standardization. Before joining DIN, he spent more than 20 years in industry working for ABB Group. He initially worked in various engineering, R&D, and product management functions in Germany, Norway, and the USA before he was appointed as responsible unit manager for ABB's robot automation and robotics product business in Germany. In 2010, he changed to ABB Corporate Research as director of the German Research Center until he was promoted head of ABB's global machinery controls and automation business at the end of 2013. In July 2016, he joined DIN as chairman of the executive board, driving customer orientation and digital transformation within the standards system by encouraging all internal and external stakeholders to be open-minded and open for change in order to shape the future with standardization. Mr. Winterhalter was elected as member of the CEN Administration Board and the ISO Council in 2017. Since 2018, he has also been CEN Vice President of Policy, including Strategy Development. In September 2021, Mr. Winterhalter was elected as the new ISO Vice President of Policy. He will take on this additional role in January 2022, initially for 2 years. And in this position, he will be responsible for ISO's policy and strategy. So with that, and without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Sergio Mujica as our first keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today. I need to share my screen if you can give me permission. Can you give me the rights to share my screen?
Sure, you should be able to do it right now.
Yes.
Still no?
No.
Give me one moment. Go ahead, try one more time.
Okay, there you go. Can you see my screen now? Yes?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Christoph. Thank you, everyone. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here with you today. Sorry. There you go. I've been Secretary General of ISO since 2017. ISO has been involved in this event since the very beginning of this Standard Technology Forum, but it's the first time that I actually had the opportunity to participate personally. And I'm really happy to have that opportunity. So let me start with a few words about ISO, about our organization. ISO was created in 1946, right after World War II, by a group of 25 countries that decided that if we wanted to rebuild the world, I'm talking right after World War II, as I said, we needed international standards because the conviction is that they are essential for economic and for social development. And it is true that we still believe the same, that with international standards, we can achieve economic and social development. But the challenges have changed a lot since 1946. And probably the main challenge that we all face as a world is the climate crisis or climate emergency. We just finished the COP26. And when we had our latest General Assembly in London, precisely the same venue, just a few meters from the place where ISO was created, we have represented our commitment to the climate agenda through the London Declaration. So what do we want to do with that London Declaration? We want to work in various areas of our organization. And the first one, of course, being our core business, which is standard development. So we want to do a mapping of the key standards to support the climate agenda. We also want to repackage those standards depending on the needs. If we're talking about carbon footprint, if we're talking about carbon capture, transportation, storage, depending on the topic, we can repackage the relevant standards. We also want to review and accelerate the revision of those standards as necessary, and also create new standards to respond to the challenges and also to the commitments made in Glasgow just a couple of days ago. There is also a dimension related to the ISO system, because before the COVID emergency, we used to create our standards through physical meetings. 85% of our meetings were physical meetings somewhere in the world under the leadership of one technical committee. After that, with COVID, we have learned how to work in a fully digital manner. So we now need to create the rules and to be equipped with the tools to support that the virtual standard development process, also with the capacity to have physical meetings when needed. So that's our key commitment as ISO community to support the climate agenda, which has been expressed in the London Declaration. Another important thing to say about ISO is that many people think of ISO saying that this is an organization which is based in Geneva, so a building in Geneva. And the truth is that we are not a building in Geneva, we are a system, we are a family composed of mainly 3 pillars. And pillar number 1 is the member. You might remember that when I mentioned the creation of ISO, it was only 25 countries. Now we are a network of 165 countries from all around the world. And we are proud to say that ISO is a member-driven organization. Not only that, we have also created the rules to ensure that it's our members who actually drive the organization through one of our golden principles, which is called the national delegation principle. So we trust our members with the identification of new standard that needs to be created, with the appointment of the experts, and also with the governance of the organization. So Christophe is gonna speak right after myself. He is the new VP Policy and Strategy within the organization. He will have the opportunity to drive some of these key areas. So pillar number 1, members. Pillar number 2 is our network of experts and technical committees. Because standards are not drafted or written here in Geneva in my office with 3 or 4 experts, we could do that and we could do it very quickly. But that is not what we believe in. We have a set of key principles and values that we want to respect if we want to be relevant. And the first one is consensus-based decision-making process. So we don't want to impose anything. We really want to achieve our decisions by consensus. Then we work in a very transparent and inclusive manner with stakeholder engagement. And we also have a very strong developmental aspect here, which is required by the World Trade Organization, by the way, because if we want to be a really global organization, we need to ensure participation from developing countries as well. So we really create global solutions responding to global needs. And we're very proud to say that we have over 800 technical committees and subcommittees working on the creation or revision of standards as we speak at this very moment. We have a wonderful network of nearly 50,000 experts appointed by the members working on the creation of those committees. And our portfolio is of around 26,000 international standards. So that's pillar number 2. And pillar number 3 now, we can mention the building in Geneva, the Central Secretariat, who has the responsibility to coordinate and to support the system. And we don't do that alone, by the way. We do it also in close collaboration with our members. So we combine our resources, we combine our talents to achieve the ISO objectives. So that's very quickly about the organization. And we have a fairly new strategy that was approved last year in 2020. It's the very first time that we have a 10-year strategy. There is a dedicated website that you can click and you can use so you get more familiar with the strategy. But what is important for me to mention is that when we created the strategy, we used the so-called golden circle methodology, because we started with what we believe is the right question, the why. why of our organization. It's not the what. If you look at the vision, you will not see the word standards. What you will see is a human-centric vision for the organization where we really want to support the Sustainable Development Goals. Our promise to the world is that we will contribute, making lives easier, safer, and better. That's the vision. And of course, we do have three goals that support that vision. One is the standard used everywhere, because ISO is a community of 165 countries, and the standards that we create need to be relevant and used everywhere. So this is not about 26,000 international standards, it's about the users, the industry, the government, the consumers using those standards. Second is meeting global needs. And this is once again very important, is the needs of the international global community, not only the needs of today, but also the needs of tomorrow. And we need to create the capacity of foresight within this organization so we understand the trends and we can respond in a timely manner. And the third one is all voices heard. That has to do with inclusivity, that has to do with the gender action plan. It has to do with engagement with young generation, and it has a lot to do with engagement with developing countries to ensure that they could participate actively in the standard development process, both at the national, but also at the international level. So together with those three objectives, we have 6 priorities, which I will not refer to in detail to each of those. But there are 2 in particular that I wanted to mention, but I think are particularly relevant to the topic of this event, digitalization and the impact on standard. The first one is about innovation to meet user needs. We really need to rethink the way we do things in order to ensure that they are meeting the user needs. And this has to do with what's explained about Christophe when they introduced you, Christophe, open-minded, open for change. In the DNA of our organization, we need to capture that key concept, to review on a permanent basis the way we do things. And the second one is to develop ISO standard when the market needs. So this is not only about doing things in very, very fast. It's mainly about timeliness. How do we ensure that our standards in 6 months, in a year, in 3 years, doesn't matter, we arrive in a timely manner to respond to the market needs and to the world needs. So those that you can see on the screen are the 6 priorities that we will be busy with in the next 9.5 years. Within the ISO strategy, we have also discussed the IT dimension, and we have identified what are the strategic directions for our digital activities and our digital transformation process. And the first one is directly related to our core business, which is standards. Of course, standards of today, because we need to support the community to create standards using good tools, technology, also improving the processes, and also being able to create our standards in a timely manner, as I said. But also, and this is the challenge, of course, to create the standards of tomorrow, for tomorrow, future-proofed standard development process with the right tools. And I will talk about SMART later in my presentation, because this is very much about SMART as well. The second strategic direction is about creating value from the data and content that we have. We're really sitting on a mine of gold. It's incredible, the amount of data that we have, and we need to be able to extract the value from the data so we can support, again, our members and our communities in a better manner, including the demonstration of the value of standards, which is another of our strategic priorities. The third one is about our members, because we need to strengthen and support our members in creating digital capacity for them to be active contributors to the standard development process at the national and also at the international level. I like to say that capacity building and this kind of collaboration is not about charity. It's about effectiveness. It's the way that we ensure that ISO will really be a family of 165 members, and all of them will have the capacity to contribute. And finally, I want to refer once again to our building in Geneva, our IT processes, because the stronger the ISO Central Secretariat is in IT terms, the better the support that we can provide to the system, to the technical community, and also to our members. So once you have created your strategy, it is all about implementation, 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 implementation. We need to make it happen in practice, and we need to fulfill our promises to the world, to the global community. And the way we did it was first by defining what we understand by success, and then we define a set of measures where we can track progress. Because if we don't know if we're making progress, we're simply not effective in the implementation of the strategy. And then we need to have a set of concrete programs and projects that need to be implemented for us to realize our vision. And that's how we created the so-called rolling implementation plan. Why rolling? Because we want to be very agile in the way we deliver our strategy. We don't want something very rigid. We need to have the capacity to adapt and to change and to improve things as we go along, and as the priorities and the challenges also evolve. So we have created a set of 10 programs. I will not definitely go in details of those 10 programs, as well as 34 projects linked to those 10 programs. And we monitor the implementation of the strategy on a very regular basis. Some of the projects that I wanted to refer more in detail later in my presentation, I will highlight now. Digital learning solutions, especially because of COVID, that changed completely the way that we deliver our capacity building activities. The second one is on SMART, that I already talked about. Then digital collaboration. This is not only about virtual standard development, it's about the capacity to collaborate with the various communities in the development of the standard. That can be made in a fully virtual manner, can also be made in a blended manner, or even in physical meetings. We need to create the digital capacity to facilitate collaboration among the various stakeholders and technical experts. And finally, data connect, because we need to use the data we have today, make it useful and valuable to all the community. And this is basically through business intelligence that we have limited capacity today, and we need to improve. So these are the other programs, which I will not refer to in details. And with that, I want to go to the first of the programs that I wanted to highlight today, which is ISO SMART. This is a truly exciting and transformational program that we need to implement if we want to maintain our relevance as an international organization. Today, all our standards, or most of our standards, are basically a document. It's a document-based organization. And let me share with you the very definition of international standard that you can see in the definitions that has been created for the organization. It's even in our webpage. A standard is a document that contain a set of requirements and technical specifications and so on. So a standard is a document. That is something that we need to change. A standard is the content, the set of rules, the data which is within the standard, but it's definitely not the document. The second one, a machine needs to be able to understand that content, to interpret that content, and also to transfer that content. And also, this is really important, to combine various standards, not only from ISO, even also from other international organizations or organizations, to provide a final user a holistic solution. They don't care about ISO, IC, or whoever. What they need to have is the set of relevant standards for the challenge or the problem they want to address. So that's the scope of our SMART program, which is, I said before, very, very exciting, at the same time, very transformational. So talking about definitions, the first part of our conversation here over a year ago was what are the various levels we want to work on. And today ISO has the capacity to deliver standards up to level 2. So in XML format, we can provide a standard that can be readable as a document by a machine. But what we're trying to evolve to in a first instance is for level 3, machine readable content, including semantic enrichment of the content, and also with the capacity to receive content of multiple standards, which is what I mentioned before, and finally, level 4 as well. And with this, I'm not trying to confuse you, but to explain why this is really transformational. Because normally you would think that this is, a set of technical solutions to deliver SMART. Not at all. It's first of all, understanding what the user needs are. If we really want to be relevant and maintain the ISO relevance, we need to understand what our user needs in a structured manner. Then we need to change our rules. It's the way that we create new standards. This is not only about adding a new layer of deliverable. It is also about creating the capacity from the outset to deliver, to create new type of standards, these SMART standards. Also change the governance rules, to change our processes, to be well equipped when creating these SMART standards. Then there is a huge dimension about the commercial policy and the business model. Because we sell documents today, we need to be able to sell content in a fragmented manner as well. So we're going to have very deep discussions, if you wish, about that, and the legal framework. How do we protect our commercial rights, our IPR, our capacity to collaborate with other organizations? So there is quite a fundamental legal discussions to have. And at the end, we will create the technical solutions, is more than one, to respond to all these various dimensions. So this is the way that we have structured our program. We have created a program board composed of our council members, a set of council members, and this is chaired by the Vice President, Policy and Strategy. So this is going to be Christophe's baby, starting on the 1st of January. But of course, this is a collective exercise and very, very inclusive, as you will know. So this program is accompanied by 3 concrete projects. The first one is use cases project, because as I said before, we need to understand what the user needs are. We need to create personas so our SMART standards can respond to those needs. Then the second project, it's about the business model and all the implications that has for our members, and also the readiness, the capacity of our members and the large community to use our SMART standards of the future, and then the technical solutions. All of this, we will do it very, very closely with our colleagues and friends of the IEC. And as we go along, we will also want to include all other relevant players, because collaboration is of the essence if we want to be successful in this transformational program. So next one is digital learning and solutions. This has been, once again, a big change for all of us. Before COVID, we used to deliver nearly 100% of our capacity building activities and training and support for our members in a face-to-face environment, mainly through workshops that we organized on site. And with COVID, we had to change everything. And really, we could unleash the power of digital here. And it has been a wonderful journey and a wonderful experience for the good of the organization. I'm not saying that everything we do in the capacity building area needs to be virtual. I'm saying that the strength is the combination, how we work together in some areas in digital, in some areas in a face-to-face environment. So what are the objectives that we're trying to achieve here? The first one is to optimize the use of digital learning solutions to serve our members. So from the Central Secretariat, we provide training, we provide support to our members. But we also want to support our members for them to create their own digital solutions and use this one as a blueprint so they can be impactful at the national level as well. And in terms of outcomes, the key three words that we want to really achieve here, the first one is agility. So we need to create a set of blended solutions that combine will equip the organization and also the members to provide digital learning. The second one is efficiency or efficacy, actually, because if we want to be effective, we need to be able to transfer knowledge in an effective manner to the users, to the technical committees, to the experts, and so on. And the third one is accessibility. We need to create something which is user-friendly, easy to access, with the real capacity, as I said before, to transfer this knowledge for them to be more effective. And finally, the third key project I wanted to share with you is our online standard development. And this actually started well before COVID. Before COVID understood that we should explore more our capacity to develop standards in a fully virtual manner. But with COVID, we have a huge acceleration in this process. And I think I mentioned this before. Before COVID, 85% of our meetings for technical committees were physical meetings, 85. And now, overnight, we turned to 100% of our meetings being virtual. So this was a fantastic opportunity for us to learn together how to work in a fully virtual environment, but we also need to create the rules to do that in an effective manner and also to have the right tools to support that process. And again, I'm not saying that we will move 100% of our standard development process to a virtual mode, but what I'm saying is that we will have much more use of those virtual opportunities and to reduce the face-to-face interactions to the minimum necessary. So where are we trying to support the standard development process through this online standard development? In the preparatory work, so even before the work of the technical committee starts, then within the technical committee, then in the interaction with the members in the inquiry phase, then in the approval, and finally in the publication. So it's from cradle to grave. During the whole process, we will provide tools, the right tools to our technical community for them to collaborate. As I said before, this is not only about a fully virtual process. This is about collaboration, providing opportunities for digital collaboration within the technical communities and also with the various communities we want to interact during this process. So why this is so important? First of all, because as I mentioned before, open-minded, open for change. We need to modernize the way we do things, but this is because this is also relevant for the way we interact with the various players in this world. In particular, next generation. We need to offer a standard development process which is attractive, that makes sense to the various users, including the next generation, and in particular, actually, the next generation. The second one is about the process. How do we make it a truly and fully inclusive process? Because this is directly related to the legitimacy of our value proposition. We need to facilitate more participation from developing countries, from young people, from new experts, from big countries, small countries, SMEs, big corporations. It has to do with the fully inclusive process, which will also impact the adoption and use of our international standards. And the third one is related to efficiency, actually. We want to reduce the overall cost of the system, including our footprint in the environment. Because as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, a key priority for us in the years to come is to contribute to the climate agenda, including the new commitments in the COP26, and ISO wants to be part of the solution, wants to be a leader in that area. So with that, that's everything I wanted to present to you today, and I would be happy to continue the discussion later in the Q&A. I'm looking forward to hearing from Christophe now. Thank you very much.
Question, should I start right away or do we tackle the questions that we saw in the chat first?
I think you can go first, Christophe.
All right. So thank you very much for having me. And good afternoon or good morning to those joining us from the US. I think it's very important to understand that an ISO strategy is nothing without implementation, and nothing is more important than the commitment of the members to put the international strategy into a national context and really commit to the implementation of the international strategy. That's why I'm trying to show you an example today, how we put the ISO strategy into a national context, and to give you kind of an overview of the bigger picture in which we operate and what actually needs to change and fall in place to really live up to the ambitions that you just heard about from Sergio. And just from a personal point of view, when I started in standardization, it was the year 2016. And it was a perfect coincidence that by 2016, we started the definition of a national standardization strategy, which is not a DIN strategy. It's not an ISO strategy in a DIN context. It's really a national strategy. So we had people from the national government, we had massive participation from industry, really committing to what does the community want to achieve as a national standardization strategy. And as you could see, the vision was really to be forward-looking, not focus standardization, just describing what is the state of the art, but more or less understand what's coming and really shape the future through early involvement of standardizers in kind of the deployment of new technology. And really with the mindset to help businesses and the societies to strengthen and shape the regional and global business that we are in. So nothing in a national context. It was always very important to say international first. It's not a national strategy, it's a national commitment to the international strategy with a lot of kind of contributions from the national level. But if you look at the different goals that we had put up back then, I just highlighted a few of them. You can see that here, standardization is an instrument of deregulation. It's to support the government, that they don't have to regulate all the details. They have to set initial essential requirements, and then it's up to the private sector, up to the standardization community to really define and describe how you could technically achieve the essential requirements in regulation and offer that as essential standards. But as you could see as goal number 3, it's really about bringing standardization into the future. And what we have heard from Sergio, it's really forward-looking, questioning some aspects of our existing system and try to translate it into the digital world. And that requires, and that was even back then clear, it requires new processes and more open platforms for coordination. So the world doesn't start with the work in the technical committee. There's a lot of preparation required to get the right stakeholders into the committees and get the right topics on the agenda of the technical committees. But what is most important is the goal number 4. It's industry and society. So it's the private sector that needs to be the driving forces in standardization. We cannot sit and wait until we get information from the regulators that there's a regulation developed that we need to support with standardization. It needs to come from the opposite way around. we have to sit together and to define a set of standards that helps technology to be deployed in a successful way. And that starts with a strategy and not a standardization strategy. Each company needs to include standardization in their company strategy. They need to use standardization as a strategic instrument. And that we haven't achieved yet. So there needs to be some things changed in our system to really be perceived as being part of a strategy within a company. And that's why I try to translate what we heard from Sergio into a bigger picture. What is standardization? I think standardization is a community of standardization experts. It's not a closed shop, but it's a system that is, let's say, I wouldn't say closed, but it's independently operating on standardization activities. So it's independent technical committees, whether they are sector-specific or horizontal committees. They create their work programs within the committee, and it's based on a multi-stakeholder participation. So these committees are responsible to initiate, to develop, and publish standards content, and if needed, to enrich the content to be really kind of easy to understand and grasp what is described in a certain standard. So that's our world, I would say. But we need to understand that this world is to be put into a bigger perspective. So there is the true innovators. They are the ones working on new technology. That's science and research. That's the universities. That's the corporate research centers. I'm coming from that corporate research background. It's startups, it's program committees where they decide where public funding goes to. This is not part of the standardization world. It's an important community where we need to be part of. So instead of just inviting them to partially participate in the technical committees, the standardization community needs to be active in the innovators community, which is a new mindset, because all the new technologies, all the digital new technologies, in essence, need some kind of regulation. So there is regulatory needs to deploy a technology. And if there's regulatory needs, there is standardization needs. So standardization needs to be an essential part of a transfer strategy of a new technology. So all the scientists and researchers need to understand about standardization and need to think early on and how would they deploy a new technology into a real production environment that is a regulated environment. So it's very important that we are part of this world and we get input early on what is coming. So what are the next big things and how could the role of standardization be to help that technology to be used in a safe and sustainable way? But there's a layer in between, and that's the decision-making layer. These guys are also not part of the standardization community, because that's the political leaders on one side. They get the information about the technology that's coming, and they identify the need, we need to regulate something. If you look at the European context, there's initiatives like the European Green Deal, there's an industry strategy coming from the European Commission, but that needs to be put into practice. So what do? They start regulatory activities. But if those are not in line with the strategic activities initiated on the private sector side, there is a disconnect. So it's very important that also the decision-making layer on industry side understands how standardization can be used as a strategic tool and basically incorporate into their strategy deployment, which means in essence that the new topics that have been identified needs to be prioritized from a political, geopolitical point of view, as well as from a company strategic point of view. And of course, if you have prioritized certain topics, then you need to structure, you need to break it down into kind of actionable pieces to say, where is actually the requirement that standardization needs to fulfill? And what can we recommend to the standardization community that the standardization expert should actually work on particular topics to find out what the technical rules are going to look like that they can practically be deployed. So it's really a structured way of creating strategic input to the standardization community. But there's another layer that we should focus much more on. And that is, as Sergio said, it's the standard users layer. Not every standards user is a standardization expert. I would say it's the opposite way around. I mean, 10 standardization experts correspond to 1,000 standard users. But if we really want to have standards that are future-proof, we need to understand not only what the experts need, but we need to understand what the users need. So if we translate a document-centric approach from today into a smart service approach in the future, we need to better understand and look very closely. How are standards used today? How are they translated? How are they processed in the technical environment? And how would a smart standards really make the life of these standard users easier? So it's all about how we in the future manage content, how we offer smart services, and how they will actually be used in a practical environment. So it's very important that we understand this big picture, and then you will easily see that there's certain kind of areas where we need to kind of improve our system. And if we make the picture a little bit clearer now, then you see there's a lot of technologies coming. I think we need to be part of the process, not only to predict, but also to prioritize things so that we narrow it down. These are the real essential questions where standardization needs to be part of the answer. And if we create standards, we need to understand that the vast majority of users are not part of our technical committees, but we need to have a structured way to reach out to them to understand, are they really capable of using the standards everywhere, as the ISO strategy claims? But the picture, it might be slightly more complex because the political leaders and the business leader are not always the same. And they have, of course, different targets and different priorities. But still, if we talk about identifying new technologies and their value, they do similar exercises. And standardization is, of course, only one instrument how to digest the potential of a new technology. I mean, you have the regulatory side. So what do political leaders do? They identify new technologies. They see there's a need for regulation. So they initiate the creation of a regulatory framework. So they regulate. And if they understand that standards can really help them to translate the regulatory requirements into something that can be measured, then they initiate standardization activities. So that is how you can motivate kind of standardization, helping the governments and involve the private sector. But this is not the normal way how things should happen. They should actually come from the other way around, so that the private sector understands from a business point of view, there is a real need for standardization because it makes things easier. It makes it much easier to open up global markets and keep the cost down. So it's the private sector that initiates standardization activities. And of course, in the end, it needs to work together so that these products and solutions that are developed through standardization are actually compatible with the regulatory framework. And this is kind of the environment where we are working in. And there is usually standardization perceived as a round table. Everybody comes around this table. It's the ideas from the private sector, the regulatory requirements from the governments, and that's how standardization operates on an operational level. But I think on the operational level, we are always kind of lagging behind because we have to wait until either we get the ideas from the private sector or the regulation is almost ready, that they basically approach the standardization community to help out with the standardization activities. So I think what we need to focus on is to understand how these regulatory processes work and where it's discussed what is to be put into regulation so that we can early on kind of involve the private sector and start with standardization activities. On the other hand, there is these roundtables on the private sector where they discuss common strategies within a certain sector, where industry commits to kind of the deployment of certain technologies. But that doesn't automatically mean things pop up in standardization. So we need to combine this. And how do we do this? We need to sit on the table when technologies are actually evaluated. So standardization needs to be part on the discussion that happens on the innovator level. And that has to have a close connection with the standardization community. But even more important, on the orchestration layer, there is these roundtables, and Sergio mentioned COP26 in Glasgow. That's a community where political leaders and business leaders talks about how can we actually support kind of the climate crisis and what can we do in standardization. But in the end, it needs to be translated to standardization work. So it's important that standardization experience is part and sits around that table so that we have a very structured dialogue with the decision-making level and the standardization community and prioritize the right things and trigger the right standardization activities. And there is, of course, a fourth roundtable, and that's the community of users. And I mean, as a publishing community, that is your customer base. So it's very important that we have a close cooperation between the publishing community and the standardization community to understand what do the users actually need, not only in terms of content, but also in terms of how should we provide access to standards content. So I think this is more or less the overall picture where we need to expand, let's say, the focus area of standardization to have a better understanding what's happening out there and what can our role be to deploy future technologies. So if you can actually translate it into a simple picture, we need to have more parties around the same table. So not only the usual suspects, strengthening standardization, because that's what we want to do. We want to have standardization perceived as a strategic element. And that requires strengthening the public-private partnership so that the public authorities and the private sectors actually come together and define what is actually needed to deploy a certain technology, overcome a certain challenge. And I think it's us that need to facilitate that kind of joint undertaking. But it's not enough if that happens on operational level. That's why it's so important that we add these three other dimensions, that we are part of the identification of topics, that we are part of the prioritization of topics, and of course, that we are part of the user community to better understand how we need to present and provide access to the relevant content. And if we have kind of seen this overall picture, I mean, we try to break it down and say, what does it actually mean for, let's say, in this case, the German community to be more active on the identified portion? We need to expand our relation with research and science. So it's the cooperation with the big research institutions. And when I talk about Science Alliance, that's kind of the science community together with the relevant ministry, that where they decide about the funding programs and how to spend public money in kind of transfer strategies. They need to understand standardization and need to incorporate. And of course, there is foresight activities in many countries, and I'm so happy that it's now part of the ISO strategy. And as you can see, on a national context, there is no DIN, there is no DKE. It's the German community that comes together and defines their kind of foresight or, let's say, agenda of new topics and validate these topics. And that we do this together on an international scale, not only in ISO, but in joint cooperation with IEC and other standards development organizations. Because not everybody has, let's say, his own list of topics. It's the topics that require standardization. And of course, we have to think about how to bring the next generation into standardization. Because the experts that deal with, I don't know, quantum computing, they are at the universities today. And if we want them to really bring their expertise into the standardization world, they need to be made aware about the role of standardization, and we need to have some kind of incentive programs to bring them into standardization. So it's very important that we work on this portion. And if we look at the orchestration dimension, I mean, we need to prioritize the strategic fields of actions together with business leaders and the political leaders. And that doesn't really happen in a structured way. So we need to have instruments in place, how we reach out to the decision makers, how they can really understand what standardization can help them with, and then give us input. What are the really important topics that we need to tackle? And Sergio mentioned it, one of the issues that we need to tackle is for sure kind of the London Declaration, where we have a strong commitment to support the Paris climate targets. And of course, if we have identified strategic focus areas, we need to, as a community, come together and try and translate it into some kind of roadmaps that are actually clearly defining what are the use cases in which a new technology is supposed to be used and where standardization can really help, so that we trigger the standardization activities and start a dialogue with the technical committees, how they could help and engage to make sure these things actually are part of the work program of the technical committees. And last but not least, I mean, this is a global environment, and there's kind of a political dimension of standardization as well. So we need to make everybody aware and support our stakeholders in understanding what is the consequence if we are not actively participate and engage in standardization and let others just take the lead and define, let's say, the technical solutions and rules for the future. But the core element remains standardization. And Sergio talked about it. We have to question the way how we create standards content, whether it's virtual or hybrid meetings, whether it's the use of IT tools, and that must not be IT tools from ISO and other IT tools from IEC, some IT tools in Germany and other IT tools on European level. No way. It has to be coordinated. So it requires a dialogue. Like today, we have to talk about technology. We have to talk about tools. We have to talk about format, and we have to agree, because we have so many experts that are active in various standardization organizations on various levels, national, European, international. I mean, they are not willing to work with different tools and live with different results, depending on which organization they are joining to work on standardization projects. We have to agree and have to have a common roadmap towards this kind of smart standard vision. But then there's more and more cross-cutting or horizontal issues that we need to tackle. So it's important that we have a structured way to orchestrate our technical committees, because they have overlaps, more and more overlaps. And if I just mention 3 themes where strong coordination is needed, it's digitalization, it's sustainability, and it's resilience. And all these dimensions are affecting a lot of standardization committees and a lot of standardization activities. So we as a standard developing organization need to be able to kind of orchestrate and advise the technical committees how they can do this, that we actually make a step forward. Just think about climate protection. We need to be able to evaluate how standards are actually contributing to the climate problem and what we need to do in a standard to be proactive rather than being part of the problem. And that needs to have a coordinated process, that needs to have a structured dialogue with the technical committees. And of course, that needs to be handled by us as the ISO members, the IEC members. That's in a sense, the kind of the future requirements for a project manager or a committee manager, that they can actually give this type of advice. And of course, it requires some tools. And in the end, it will kind of create a more strategic alignment between the standardization community, so that the standards catalog remains consistent, but we have methods to address, for example, sustainability aspects in every standard, and that we can monitor how good we are with our overall standards catalog in supporting certain strategic projects. And of course, that also requires to be more proactive, understanding how things are connected, understanding big themes, and then motivating certain committees and stakeholders that they're actually willing to take up new topics, to take the lead of these topics, and not only to do it on national level, but to invest time and resources to support the international process, because most of these issues can only be solved on the international level. So we need to have a strong commitment from our standardization experts to engage in international standardization. And then, of course, last but not least, and that is where the publishing community comes into the picture. We need to have a good focus on the application of standards. I mean, the ISO strategy is around ISO standards used everywhere, not sold everywhere, not developed from everywhere, but used everywhere. So we really need to understand the user's needs. And the majority of the users is small and medium-sized enterprises. They can, in a lot of cases, not even afford to invest time and resources to work in standardization. But we need to understand how they are actually capable of using or getting the information that there is relevant content. And then, of course, the next step to use it for their business environment. And we have like committees just focusing on the requirements of SMEs, and that committee needs to be strengthened. There is committees that deal with, let's say, the practical side of deploying standards. That committee needs to be strengthened and have a completely different role in order to support kind of the smart standards activities, which is in essence an international project that is to be driven not only in ISO, but ISO and IEC. And I think we need to invite every SDO to kind of buy into this project and contribute, because in the end of the day, this is one technology, it's one methodology that we want to deploy so that every kind of standard can actually understood and used from, let's say, a similar technology that is understood from everybody. And then, of course, for the publishing organization, that needs to, I mean, look at alternative scenarios of selling documents to subscription-based model, digital solutions, and understanding what's the value proposition of, instead of selling a document, providing access to content. And that's why it's so important, and Sergio said it in the SMART project, we need to come from what is the user scenario? And if we have understood the user scenario, what's the value proposition for the user? And if you have a value proposition, you can create a business model. And if you have a business model, then you need to review the technical solution, whether it fits to the business model. So that's exactly the order in which we approach this project. And it's a team exercise. So we need to work with partners. And I think the whole publishing community needs to be a partner of this project. We can only succeed together. And in the European context, of course, we need to invest together. So that's why we look at principles of shared digital infrastructures, so that we can actually kind of succeed in this journey all together. So to sum up, as a national standardization body, I mean, we really have to evolve from a pure standards institute to a more holistic service provider for all aspects of standardization. And it really starts with being part of the innovators community to identify the right topics, to orchestrate and prioritize the right issues, and then start a dialogue with the technical committees to do right standardization projects, and then provide the result of the standardization project in a digital format that everybody can use. So it's really about having a good process to sustainably secure the competitiveness of our economy and to create trust in a connected world. But before I close, I would like to really break it down to what is now different. I mean, in this scenario, this is kind of the Dean group operating in the traditional way, where we get the requirements for new projects through the experts coming from the private sector, because they really want to gain market access for their new product ideas. And of course, we get some financial support from the public authorities, because in the end, we will help them with the standards, with kind of supporting their regulatory framework. And then we're offering standards through the publishing branch to the set of standard users. So what are we going to add now? And you heard from Sergio, one of the strategic elements of the ISO strategies to meet global needs. So we need to understand by connecting to the innovators, the business leaders, the political leaders, that we get the right topics in a timely manner into standardization. So instead of just waiting until it comes through the experts, we need to complement this input by creating, for example, standardization roadmaps. And I just give you two examples. So to really break down what is Industry 4.0 and what can standardization do to actually make it happen? Artificial intelligence that has some regulatory requirements, how we can translate it into standardization. So things are happening in standardization, but to do it in a structured way, that's to involve the decision-making and strategic level, involve the innovators, not in the work in the technical committee, but first of all, in understanding what is the standardization need in a transfer strategy into a national strategy to deploy these technologies. So that's what we need to focus on, not only on national level, but also on international level. And now I'm coming back to the publishing requirements. I mean, we have the user, so we need to innovate to meet users' needs. And it clearly tells you something needs to change, because it's not only meet users' needs, it's we need to innovate as a community to be even better in grasping, understanding what the user needs and providing the right services. So it's really about the ISO SMART program, understanding what is the digital standards project all about. And it's also a community project. It's not an ISO project. It's for sure not a DIN project. It's the whole community that needs to discuss how we can do it and how can we make sure the users are going to benefit from that program. And as you could see on the white paper, there is corresponding national initiatives, which is a community initiative. And I have not said that even the standardization roadmaps that I started talking about, that's a community exercise. It's not a DIN exercise. It's not a particular technical committee exercise. It's a community exercise to talk about standardization and then provide input. And it's the same with the ISO SMART program. It's a community exercise where we need to involve a lot of users, but the whole publishing community to really define how this is supposed to be done, because then we can innovate to meet users' needs, having the right understanding how to translate these new standards into something that can be understood and used in the most efficient way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you, Sergio. We have quite a few questions that have come in for both of you as a result of both of your wonderful presentations. So let me start with Sergio. This first question is from IEEE. Are there any specific implementation aspects of ISO Smart with regards to digital standards at this point, or are these under development? For example, are standards available to users today in XML format? Do you envision AI tools enabling users to extract content from your standards and recombine into customized standards documents, including standards content from other SDOs? Thank you.
Well, that's a very good question and quite a challenging one. And as Christoph mentioned, what is important here is that we have started from the identification and understanding of the user group. That's the starting point. From there, we want to understand the value proposition. From there, we want to review our business model. And at the very end, we develop our technical solution. Of course, these three areas will be working somehow in parallel because they are completely interconnected. This is something that will have to be addressed during that journey. And of course, we know that the fragmentation of our content and the combination of our content with the content provided by other SDOs is something that need to be assessed, because our users, they really don't care whether it's ISO, IC, or others. They want comprehensive solutions to their challenges. So the combination of various subsets of standards is something that definitely will be assessed during the journey.
Thank you very much. Another question for you, Sergio, from ASTM. In your opinion, what industries are asking for these solutions that you've mentioned during your presentation?
I have two things to say, and they understand that Sebastian wants to answer that as well. So let's start with the TMB, the Technical Management Board report, because they worked for over a year in the scoping and understanding of what SMART is. And they also included in that exercise the identification of the main sectors and industries that are today they need SMART. They have mentioned construction, especially in buildings. They mentioned petrol industry, and they mentioned manufacturer of mechanical and electrical components. So there is an actual need today in those sectors. That's number one. Number two, in that report created by the TMB, they identified 9,000 of the ISO portfolio, which 9,000 standards of the total of 26,000, which are ready today to start being translated into SMART, should that be necessary, and should that also match the priorities that our users will identify. And my last and more important probably comment on this is that we probably don't know for sure what are the industry and the sector most impacted by this. And that's why we have created use cases, a subgroup, for us to determine what the key sectors are, where the priorities are, and to lead the pilots that we will have to conduct throughout the process.
Thank you. Christoph, do you have anything to add to this?
I think Sergio explained it perfectly, and especially to the answer. Do we expect that SMART standards will be used in a way that, independent which SDO is providing content, they want to have a similar access? The answer is definitely yes. Are we there yet? No, but that's exactly what why we're talking to each other, and why we are setting up, let's say, an 8-year strategy plan to really make it happen. Because as Sergio said, from a user's point of view, they couldn't care less whether it's an ISO, IEC, ASTM, IEEE standard. I mean, they want to have access to the relevant standard. And if these standards are interrelated, they want to have one simple methodology to understand which element of the standard is coming from kind of which organization, how they can use it into a holistic context.
Thank you. Sergio, another question for you. Key challenges with SMART standards. This comes from NISO. Key challenges with SMART standards that extend beyond the technology of the format of the standard is the licensing terms under which SMART standards are distributed, such that they can be incorporated into a user system. This seems one area that has been unclear in ISO Smart Standards policy. Are there conversations ongoing on Smart Standards licensing that will support their reuse?
Definitely, yes. That's part of the remit or the scope of the second subgroup of the three that I mentioned, which is a business model. They will analyze all the legal implications, including the licensing. It's definitely something we need to address if we want to combine our efforts with other organizations that create standards and also give the opportunity to the final user to have a comprehensive solution that will combine portion of standards from various organizations.
Thank you. This next question is for Christoph from NEN. Where does the initiative need to come from for the structured approach that you've mentioned in your presentation? How do we involve the users in the earlier stages of this process? And do you see the possibility to completely open up the standardization process?
Let me put it like this. I mean, the identification of relevant topics and the structuring is a community exercise. I think today standardization works in technical committees and it creates documents. If you really like to have a structured approach involving a really open, wide community, we need to have a different approach. And that's kind of an open platform to come together and develop a roadmap that is then advising the technical committees. So from that point of view, no, I could envision that we continue in this kind of technical committee focused approach to develop standardization. But on the other hand, also when it comes to deploying content, that needs to open up again. So we need to have a community where we talk to the users, how they would like to utilize standards to really maybe even have documents at the end of the standards development. But then we need to have a structured process to extract the relevant content from these documents and provide it in a completely different digital format. But that's exactly the transformation that we have to go through. But yes, there needs to be an open community that discusses what are the priorities and the requirements to come. And there needs to be an open community to digest, I mean, how do we want to have access to standards content? But the core process in the middle, I would really commit to a national delegation principle to have technical committees who are fully empowered, industry driven. I think these are good elements that we want to keep. But we need to engage a broader community in the, let's say, the front loading process, as well as in the deployment process later on.
Thank you
I
very
hope
much.
that makes it clear, Joe.
Yes. That was Joe. How did you guess? Okay, and the last question is for both Sergio and for Christoph. So perhaps Sergio, you can answer first and then followed by Christoph. There has always been a traditional relationship between standards development and publishing, with publishing being very much in the background. Do you foresee this changing as business strategies evolve?
I don't see any reason why we should not be strategic partners. So for me, the more we can do in terms of strengthening the cooperation, the better for the users, which is at the end the one we want to serve.
I would go one step further. I think when I joined Dean, I mean, the Boyd colleagues, they were like a separate entity, and we were happy to really get money from licensing of standards later on. Now, Mario and Sebastian, they are part of our core management team. There's not a single management meeting without the publishing people sitting around the table. It needs to have an integrated approach. I mean, I'm not heading a standardization organization. I'm heading a group that consists of standard development and publishing. And it needs to have a common strategy. And we really need to engage much more of the publishing world and publishing competence into our strategy implementation plans. So yes, it will dramatically change. It has to change.
Thank you both very much. And our last question here is from ASTM. Something I hear frequently is how to bridge the original standards text and the data. Traditionally, we hear how important this is to our committees. Do we always show context when data is absorbed? Do we develop other technical solutions and require users to accommodate the entire document when absorbing data? Sergio, your thoughts?
I'm not sure I'm well equipped to answer that question. Maybe Christoph can help.
I think depends. I mean, first of all, we need more context knowledge into the standardization committee. So the standardization committee is aware about where the standards is used in the value chain of a company. What's the persona, as Sergio put it, that is going to deal with the standard? And I think that is very important, that we have more user experience, user knowledge sitting around the table when we develop a standard. And of course, if we want to extract certain elements that are relevant for a certain use case of a standard, I'm not sure whether that person needs to acquire the complete standard with all the kind of the background information of the context given in the document in order to utilize his requirement that he might want to use in his context. So I think we need to learn about how to do this in the most efficient way. But it's definitely going to change compared to what we see today.
Yes, I think that to your point, Christoph, this is something that most standards organizations are always worried about. If portions of their document are taken out and used independently of the entire document, will that subject them to any sort of liability? Will people take it out of context? So I think your answer is very relevant and makes a lot of sense. So with that, I think we've ended our Q&A session for both of you. Thank you both very much for joining us today. It was a very wonderful talk that both of you gave us and gave us much to think about for the rest of our session. And with that, I will pass it back over to take a break here for some time, and we will be back in a few minutes. Thank you both very much.
Thank you very much.